The mahogany conference room at Henderson Associates law firm felt suffocating that Tuesday morning in downtown Seattle. Rain streaked the floor-to-ceiling windows as 5 adult children of Theodore Brown sat in uncomfortable silence, waiting for the reading of their father's will. What none of them expected was that in the next 30 minutes, their carefully constructed family hierarchy would crumble, revealing secrets that had been buried for over 2 decades. 24-year-old Solice Brown sat in the corner chair, unconsciously making herself small as she'd done her entire life, while her 4 older siblings occupied the prime seats around the conference table. She remained relegated to the periphery, exactly where the Brown family had always placed her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Solice had learned early that being the youngest in the Brown family meant being invisible. Born 12 years after her nearest sibling, she'd grown up more like an only child, in a house full of strangers who happened to share her last name. Her father, Theodore Brown, had built his construction empire from nothing, starting with a single pickup truck and a toolbox in 1975. By the time Solice was born in 1999, Brown Construction had become one of the Pacific Northwest's most successful companies, with projects spanning from luxury condominiums in Bellevue to commercial complexes throughout Washington state. Theodore was a man who believed respect was earned through achievement and contribution to the family business. Her older siblings had understood this currency from birth. Marcus, at 36, had been groomed as the heir apparent since he was 15, spending summers learning every aspect of the business from foundation to finish work. He possessed their father's sharp business acumen and natural leadership abilities that commanded respect from both employees and clients. Victoria, 34, had earned her MBA from Wharton and managed the company's financial operations with precision that impressed even their father's toughest competitors. Daniel, 32, oversaw all major construction projects, inheriting Theodore's eye for quality and detail that had built the company's sterling reputation. Even Jennifer, 30, had found her place as head of human resources, managing the company's 200-plus employees with a combination of warmth and efficiency that kept turnover remarkably low. Then there was Solice. While her siblings had spent their teenage years learning the construction business, Solice had been quietly excelling in entirely different pursuits. She'd discovered her love for literature at age 7, devouring books faster than the local library could recommend them. By high school, she was writing short stories that won regional competitions, and her English teachers consistently praised her unique voice and perspective. But in the Brown household, creativity was viewed as a luxury they couldn't afford to indulge. Theodore had clawed his way out of poverty through practical skills and hard work, and he expected his children to follow the same path. "Art doesn't put food on the table," Theodore would say whenever Solice mentioned her writing aspirations. "The construction business is what built this family. It's what will sustain this family." So Solice learned to keep her dreams private. She'd write in her journal late at night, crafting stories about characters who felt understood and valued. During family dinners, while her siblings discussed quarterly reports, project timelines, and client relationships, Solice would sit quietly, offering occasional nods when addressed directly. She became an expert at reading the room, understanding family dynamics through observation rather than participation. The Brown family's Mercer Island estate reflected Theodore's success and values. The 8,000-square-foot house showcased the finest craftsmanship, custom millwork, imported marble, and architectural details that served as a living advertisement for Brown Construction's capabilities. Family photos lined the hallways, but an observant visitor might notice they were primarily composed of 4 siblings. Solice appeared in obligatory group shots, but rarely in the candid moments that captured the family's genuine connections. Marcus had married his college sweetheart, Sarah, and they lived in a stunning contemporary home that Brown Construction had built specifically for them as a wedding gift. Victoria had received a down payment for her downtown Seattle penthouse when she'd completed her MBA.
Daniel's wedding present had been a lakefront property where Brown Construction had built his family's dream home. Jennifer had gotten her starter home renovated completely when she had joined the company full-time.
Solice, meanwhile, was still living in her childhood bedroom at 24, working part-time at a local bookstore while pursuing her bachelor's degree in English literature at the University of Washington. Her siblings viewed her continued presence in the family home as evidence of her lack of ambition and independence. What they didn't know was that Theodore had actively discouraged her attempts to move out, claiming she wasn't financially ready and suggesting she focus on more practical career options. The family dynamics were complex and nuanced. Theodore genuinely loved all his children, but his expression of love was tied directly to their contribution to his life's work. He understood Marcus's strategic thinking, appreciated Victoria's financial expertise, respected Daniel's craftsmanship, and valued Jennifer's people skills. But Solice's quiet, introspective nature and artistic inclinations puzzled him. He saw her as fragile, impractical, and unprepared for the harsh realities of the business world. Marcus, as the eldest and heir apparent, had unconsciously adopted Theodore's perspective. He viewed Solice with a mixture of affection and concern, similar to how one might regard a beloved but impractical pet. Victoria, driven and ambitious, found Solice's apparent lack of direction frustrating. She'd made several attempts over the years to involve Solice in the business, offering her entry-level positions that Solice had politely declined. Daniel was perhaps the most neutral, focused primarily on his work and young family. Jennifer, being closest in age to Solice among the siblings, had made the most effort to include her, but their 12-year age gap and vastly different life stages created natural barriers. The extended family and social circle reinforced these dynamics. At company events, charity galas, and family gatherings, people naturally gravitated toward the four older siblings who were actively involved in the business and community leadership roles. Solice had become adept at blending into the background, making polite conversation when approached, but never drawing attention to herself. Her relationship with her father was particularly complicated. Theodore wasn't intentionally cruel or neglectful, but his attention and approval were finite resources that seemed reserved for those who shared his vision and values. He'd attend Marcus's business presentations with pride, celebrate Victoria's financial achievements, praise Daniel's project completions, and acknowledge Jennifer's employee satisfaction ratings. But when Solice won a university writing award or had a short story published in a literary magazine, Theodore's response was typically a distracted, "That's nice, honey," before redirecting the conversation to business matters. This pattern had persisted for so long that it had become the family's normal. Solice had internalized her role as the family's afterthought, the child who was loved, but not quite understood or valued in the same way as her siblings. She learned to find validation elsewhere, through her professors, her few close friends, and her own internal sense of accomplishment when she completed a particularly challenging piece of writing. What made this dynamic particularly painful was that Solice possessed many qualities that could have contributed meaningfully to the family business, had anyone bothered to recognize them. Her observational skills, honed through years of watching family interactions, gave her remarkable insight into human behavior and motivation. Her writing had taught her to communicate complex ideas clearly and persuasively. Her literature studies had developed her analytical thinking and ability to see patterns and connections that others might miss. But in the Brown family's established narrative, Solice remained the impractical dreamer, the child who'd never found her place in their world of concrete and steel, profit margins and project deadlines. As they sat in that conference room waiting for the will reading, each family member carried their own assumptions about what Theodore's final wishes would reveal, and absolutely none of them imagined that the family's forgotten child was about to become the center of their entire universe. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
The call came on a gray Thursday morning in February, while Solice was arranging a display of new romance novels at Pages and Poetry, the independent bookstore where she worked. Her phone buzzed against the wooden counter, displaying Marcus's name, unusual since her eldest brother rarely contacted her directly. "Solice, you need to get to Harborview Medical Center immediately." Marcus's voice was strained, barely controlled. "Dad's had a massive heart attack." The 20-minute drive to the hospital passed in a blur. Solice's hands trembled on the steering wheel of her aging Honda Civic as she navigated through Seattle's midday traffic. Her mind raced with fragments of memories, her father's recent complaints about chest tightness that he'd dismissed as stress, his refusal to slow down despite being 72, his insistence that annual checkups were for people who had time to be sick. The cardiac intensive care unit buzzed with controlled urgency. Solice found her siblings clustered around the waiting area, their usual confident demeanors replaced by something she'd rarely seen: vulnerability. Marcus paced near the windows, his phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in hushed tones about postponing meetings and reassuring clients. Victoria sat rigid in a plastic chair, her laptop open as she managed what she could from the hospital, her fingers flying across the keyboard in sharp, decisive movements. Daniel stood by the vending machines, not buying anything, just staring at the illuminated options as if they held answers. Jennifer was on the phone with her husband, arranging childcare while tears streamed down her cheeks. Dr. Patricia Chen, the cardiologist, emerged from Theodore's room with the kind of expression that prepared families for difficult conversations. She was a small woman with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and her scrubs bore the rumpled evidence of a long shift. "Your father is stable for now," she began, "but the damage to his heart is extensive. We're looking at a complete blockage of the left anterior descending artery, what we call the widowmaker. We've performed an urgent angioplasty and placed 2 stents, but his heart function is significantly compromised." Marcus stepped forward, automatically assuming his role as family spokesperson. "What's his prognosis, doctor?" Dr. Chen's pause was brief but telling. "With aggressive treatment, medication, and significant lifestyle changes, patients can live productive lives after this type of event. However, your father's case is complicated by his age and the fact that he ignored warning signs for what appears to have been months. The next 72 hours are critical." "Can we see him?" Jennifer asked, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "2 at a time, and only for brief visits. He's sedated but may have moments of consciousness." The siblings looked at each other, and Solice recognized the familiar dynamic. Marcus and Victoria would go first, as the business leaders. Daniel and Jennifer would follow. She would wait until last, if at all. But something unexpected happened. Theodore's eyes fluttered open as Dr. Chen spoke, and his gaze moved slowly across his children's faces before settling on Solice. His mouth moved slightly, though no sound emerged due to the breathing tube. "I think he wants to see Solice," Dr. Chen observed. "Sometimes patients respond differently to family members. The emotional connection can be quite powerful during recovery." Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "Solice, are you sure?" Dr. Chen nodded. His vitals actually improved when his eyes focused on her. "It's not uncommon, but it is significant." Solice felt her sibling stares as she followed Dr. Chen into the ICU room. Theodore looked smaller than she'd ever seen him, dwarfed by the machines that monitored his every heartbeat and breath. His usual commanding presence was reduced to the fragile form of an elderly man confronting his mortality. When she took his hand, his eyes opened and fixed on hers with an intensity that was startling. He couldn't speak, but she could see him trying to communicate something urgent. His fingers pressed weakly against hers in what felt like almost Morse code. 3 short squeezes, then 3 long ones, then 3 short again. SOS. "I'm here, Dad," she whispered. "You're going to be okay." But Theodore's expression suggested he knew something different. his eyes filled with tears, something Solice had never witnessed in her 24 years. He was trying to tell her something, and the frustration of being unable to speak was clearly agonizing him. The next 3 days blurred together in a cycle of hospital vigils, hushed conversations, and cautious hope. Theodore drifted in and out of consciousness, and each time he awoke, his eyes searched for solace. The nurses began commenting on how much calmer he seemed when she was present, how his heart rate stabilized and his blood pressure improved. "You have a calming effect on him," Nurse Rodriguez mentioned to Solice during one of the evening shifts. "In 30 years of cardiac care, I've learned to trust these instincts. He's fighting harder when you're here." Solice began spending entire nights at the hospital, sleeping in the uncomfortable reclining chair beside Theodore's bed. Her siblings would visit during business hours, checking on both their father's condition and the messages from concerned employees, clients, and business partners. Brown Construction's operations continued under Marcus's leadership, but everyone understood that major decisions awaited Theodore's recovery. On Saturday morning, Theodore's condition seemed to improve dramatically. He was more alert, his color looked better, and Dr. Chen cautiously suggested they might be turning a corner. The breathing tube had been removed, though he remained on oxygen and could only speak in whispers. "Solice," he managed to say when she leaned close to his bed, "need to tell you. Save your strength, Dad. You can tell me anything when you're better." But Theodore's grip on her hand tightened with surprising strength. "No. Listen. Important." His voice was barely audible, and she had to put her ear close to his mouth to hear him. "The safe. In my study. Combination is your birthday. Month. Day. Year. There's a letter for you. Only you." Solice felt a chill. "Dad, you're scaring me. You're going to be fine. You can show me whatever it is when you come home." Theodore's eyes filled with tears again. "Been wrong. About you. So wrong. Forgive me." Before Solice could respond, alarms began sounding. Theodore's monitor showed an irregular rhythm that quickly became chaotic. Dr. Chen and her team rushed in, working frantically as Solice was gently but firmly guided out of the room. In the hallway, her siblings gathered around her. "What happened?" Marcus demanded. "What was he saying to you?" "He was just confused," Solice managed, though Theodore's words had been anything but confused. He'd been lucid and purposeful, sharing something he'd been carrying for years. The medical team worked for 47 minutes. Dr. Chen finally emerged, her expression grave. "I'm sorry, we did everything we could, but the damage to his heart was too extensive. He suffered a massive cardiac arrest, and we weren't able to restore normal rhythm." Theodore Brown, the man who had built an empire through sheer determination and will, had died at 3:47 p.m. on February 18, 2024. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of arrangements and notifications. Marcus took charge of contacting clients and employees, Victoria handled the financial and legal requirements, Daniel managed the logistics of funeral arrangements, and Jennifer coordinated with extended family and friends. Solice found herself once again in the background, helping where she could, but mostly trying to process the weight of her father's final words. That evening, alone in the family home for the first time since Theodore's death, Solice stood outside her father's study. The room had always been his sanctuary, lined with architectural books, construction awards, and photographs documenting Brown Construction's growth from a one-man operation to a regional powerhouse. The safe was built into the wall behind a painting of the first commercial building Theodore had constructed in 1978. Her hands shook when she entered the combination. 11/15/1999, her birthday. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing several folders, legal documents, and a sealed envelope marked "For Solice Elizabeth Brown," to be opened only by her. Inside the envelope was a letter written in her father's careful handwriting, dated just 6 months earlier. As Solice read the first line, she realized that everything she thought she knew about her place in the Brown family was about to change forever. "My dearest Solice, If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And I pray you can forgive a stubborn old man who spent too many years not seeing what was right in front of him."
Solice's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter completely, her father's familiar handwriting blurring through her tears. The study felt different now, less intimidating, more like a sanctuary where Theodore had wrestled with truths he'd never spoken aloud. "My dearest Solice, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I pray you can forgive a stubborn old man who spent too many years not seeing what was right in front of him. I've been carrying secrets that have shaped our family in ways you never knew, and it's time you understood why I kept you at arm's length. Not because you weren't good enough, but because you were too precious to risk." The letter continued for 3 pages, written in Theodore's methodical style, each word carefully chosen. As Solice read, her understanding of her entire childhood began to shift like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. Your mother's death wasn't the simple car accident we told everyone. Margaret was coming to see me that night in November 1999, 3 weeks after you were born, because she'd discovered something that could have destroyed everything I'd built. She'd found evidence that my business partner, Robert Henley, had been using Brown Construction as a front for money laundering operations tied to organized crime families in Vancouver. Solice sank into Theodore's leather chair, the weight of this revelation pressing down on her chest. Her mother, Margaret, had died when Solice was barely a month old. The family had always described it as a tragic accident. She'd lost control of her car on a rainy night while coming home from visiting a friend. Margaret was brilliant with numbers, more so than even Victoria realizes. She'd been doing freelance accounting work for several construction companies, including some of Henley's side projects. She noticed discrepancies, unusual cash flows, invoices for materials that were never delivered to job sites. When she confronted me, I was already suspicious, but had no proof. We arranged to meet that night so she could show me everything she'd discovered. The letter detailed how Margaret had been driving to meet Theodore at his office when her car had been forced off the road on the winding section of Highway 18 near Tiger Mountain. The official investigation concluded that she'd hydroplaned in the rain, but Theodore had always suspected something more sinister. The next morning, Henley came to me with condolences and an offer to buy out my shares of the company, said it would be too difficult for me to manage everything as a single father with a newborn. That's when I knew Margaret had been right and that her death wasn't an accident. But I had no proof, and I had 5 children to protect, including you, the most vulnerable of all. Theodore had spent the next 6 months carefully documenting Henley's activities while publicly maintaining their partnership. He discovered that Henley had been inflating construction costs on certain projects, then funneling the excess payments through shell companies that laundered money for organized crime families in Vancouver. Solice was crying now, understanding flooding through her as she read about her father's impossible position. He'd been a young widower with 5 children, facing an enemy who had already proven capable of murder. Henley took the deal. He sold me his shares for far less than they were worth and disappeared. But before he left, he made it clear that he knew where all of us lived, where we went to school, our routines. He implied that accidents could happen to anyone, anytime. The threat was unmistakable. The letter explained Theodore's subsequent behavior, his overprotectiveness, his reluctance to let Solice venture far from home, his discouragement of her independence. What she'd interpreted as lack of interest had actually been desperate fear. Your brothers and sister were older, more visible in the community through the business, but you were the baby, the one who could disappear without anyone outside the family noticing immediately. I convinced myself that keeping you close, keeping you involved in the business, would keep you safe from any remnants of Henley's network. Theodore had hired private investigators to track Henley's movements for years. The man had eventually been killed in a gang dispute in Miami in 2010, but by then, the pattern of family dynamics had been established. Solice had been conditioned to stay in the background, and Theodore had been so focused on protecting her that he'd forgotten to actually connect with her. I realize now that I was wrong. Instead of keeping you safe, I kept you isolated. Instead of protecting you from danger, I protected you from life itself. You grew up thinking you weren't good enough, weren't valued, weren't seen. The truth is, you were the one I watched most carefully, worried about most deeply, and loved most fiercely, because you reminded me so much of your mother. The letter's tone shifted as Theodore wrote about discovering Solice's writing talents through teachers who had contacted him over the years. He'd kept every award certificate, every published story, every glowing recommendation letter in a private file. "I've read everything you've ever written, Solice. Your teachers would send me copies thinking I'd be proud. I was proud, but I was also terrified. Your writing showed the same analytical mind that your mother possessed, the same ability to see patterns and connections that others missed. I was afraid that if you got involved in the business world, if you started asking the same kinds of questions Margaret had asked, history might repeat itself." But the most shocking revelation came in the letter's final section, where Theodore detailed provisions he'd made that none of his other children knew about. "I've established a trust fund that has been growing for 24 years, started with the money from Henley's buyout. Every dollar that came from his blood money has been working to secure your future. I've also been quietly purchasing real estate under a corporate entity that you'll inherit completely. Your siblings think I've been conservative with investments, but I've been building something specifically for you." The letter included a detailed list: properties in Seattle's most desirable neighborhoods, a portfolio of blue-chip stocks, bonds, and a savings account that had grown to substantial proportions through careful investment and compound interest. "Most importantly, I've revised my will in ways that will surprise everyone, including our attorney. Your siblings have been integral to Brown Construction's success, and they've been compensated accordingly through salaries, bonuses, company shares, and the homes I've provided. They have skills and resources to continue thriving. But you, my dear daughter, have been overlooked for too long." Solice set the letter down, her mind reeling. Everything she'd believed about her place in the family, her father's feelings toward her, her own worth and potential, all of it had been based on a protective deception that had lasted her entire life. The house felt different now, filled with the presence of secrets finally revealed. She walked through the rooms she'd grown up in, seeing them with new eyes. The family photos that had seemed to minimize her presence now looked like careful attempts to keep her image out of public view. Her father's apparent disinterest in her achievements now seemed studied indifference, designed to deflect attention from her talents. Her phone buzzed with messages from her siblings, sharing funeral arrangements and discussing the reading of Theodore's will scheduled for the following Tuesday. Marcus had sent a group text asking everyone to be prepared for the division of Brown Construction assets and various family properties. "Dad was always fair with us," Victoria had replied. "I'm sure he's made provisions for everyone according to their contributions to the family business." "Solice should probably start thinking about what she wants to do with her portion," Daniel had added. "Maybe it's time she considered joining the company in some capacity." "We'll help her figure out next steps," Jennifer had written. "She's never really had to handle significant financial decisions before." Their well-meaning but patronizing messages stung differently now. They had no idea what was coming, no understanding that their father's final act would challenge every assumption they'd made about family hierarchy and worth. Solice spent the night reading and rereading Theodore's letter, each pass revealing new layers of meaning. She understood now why she'd felt so disconnected from the family business, why her father had seemed uncomfortable whenever she showed interest in his work, why he actively discouraged her from pursuing internships or entry-level positions with other companies.
The morning of the will reading arrived with the kind of crisp February clarity that made Seattle's skyline look like a postcard. Solice stood in front of her bedroom mirror, choosing her outfit with more care than she'd ever given to family business events. Today felt different, not just because of what she knew from Theodore's letter, but because of the decision she'd made in the quiet hours before dawn. She chose a navy blue dress that her father had complimented once, pairing it with the simple pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother. For the first time in her life, she wasn't dressing to disappear into the background. She was dressing to claim her place. The drive to Henderson Associates law firm took her through downtown Seattle, past the construction sites where Brown construction crews were already at work. She found herself noticing details she'd never paid attention to before. The quality of the workmanship, the efficiency of the operations, the brown construction signs that marked projects throughout the city. This wasn't just her father's legacy anymore. According to his letter, it was part of her inheritance in ways her siblings couldn't imagine. At the law firm, she arrived deliberately early. The receptionist, Mrs. Chen, recognized her immediately. "Miss Brown, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father was a remarkable man." "Thank you. He really was," Solice replied, and meant it with a depth of understanding that would have been impossible a week ago. She was escorted to the same conference room where this story had begun, but now she sat in a different chair, not the corner seat she'd occupied for years, but one of the primary chairs around the mahogany table. The small act felt revolutionary. Marcus arrived next, looking every inch the successful businessman in his tailored charcoal suit. He paused when he saw Solice's choice of seating, but said nothing, instead checking his phone for messages from the office. Victoria followed minutes later, her professional demeanor masking what Solice now recognized as genuine grief. Daniel appeared with Jennifer, both looking somber but composed. "I still can't believe he's gone," Jennifer said, taking the seat beside Solice. "The house feels so empty without him." "He lived such a full life, though," Daniel added. "Built something that will last for generations." Marcus nodded. "The company's in good shape. We've already had 3 new clients reach out this week wanting to move forward with projects they discussed with Dad. His reputation opens doors that will stay open for us." Victoria opened her laptop. "I've been reviewing the corporate structure and our various holdings. Dad was more diversified than I realized, but it's all very straightforward. The company ownership, the real estate, the investment accounts, everything's been organized exactly as you'd expect from someone with his attention to detail." Solice listened to her siblings' confident assumptions, feeling the weight of knowledge they didn't possess. They were planning for a future based on their understanding of the family hierarchy, completely unaware that Theodore had been playing a much longer game. "I suppose the question is," Marcus continued, "is how we want to handle Solice's inheritance. Dad always kept her separate from the business, so I'm thinking maybe a trust fund or something that gives her financial security without the complexity of company ownership." "That makes sense," Victoria agreed. "She's never shown interest in the operational side, and honestly, jumping into construction management isn't something you can learn overnight. We could set up some kind of education fund. Maybe she could go back to school, get an MBA, figure out what she actually wants to do with her life." Jennifer, always the most sympathetic, turned to Solice. "What do you think? Are there programs you've been interested in? We want to make sure you're taken care of." Their well-intentioned condescension stung, but Solice found herself responding with a calm she'd never possessed before. "I appreciate your concern, but I think we should wait to hear what Dad actually decided before we make plans." Something in her tone made Marcus look up from his phone. "Of course, I just meant that will all help you navigate whatever he's left you. Financial management can be overwhelming when you're not used to it." Before Solice could respond, the conference room door opened and Harold Henderson entered. At 68, he'd been Theodore's attorney for over 30 years, handling everything from the company's incorporation to various real estate transactions. He carried a thick folder and wore the expression of someone who'd been practicing law long enough to know when a will reading would surprise everyone involved. "Good morning, everyone. Again, my deepest condolences on your father's passing. Theodore was not only a client, but a genuine friend, and his loss is felt throughout the entire community." He settled into his chair and opened the folder. "Before we begin, I want to say that your father spent considerable time over the past year updating his will and related documents. He was very specific about his intentions and very clear about his reasoning. Some of his decisions may surprise you, but I can assure you that every provision was carefully considered and legally sound." Marcus leaned forward. "Should we expect anything unusual?" Henderson's pause was telling. "Your father was
thorough in his planning. He wanted to ensure that each of his children received what he believed they needed and deserved, but his methodology may not align with your expectations. The formal reading began with standard legal language, but quickly moved into specifics that made the siblings exchange glances. Theodore had indeed left provisions for Marcus, Victoria, Daniel, and Jennifer, but not what they had anticipated.
Each of the 4 older siblings received their current homes, which they'd already been living in, plus a trust fund of $500,000 each, and a 5% stake in Brown Construction. The shares were non-voting, designed to provide them with annual dividend income, but no control over company operations. Wait, Marcus interrupted. 5% each? That's only 20% total. What about the remaining 80% of the company? Henderson looked directly at Solice before answering. The remaining 80% of Brown Construction, along with the primary family residence, the company's liquid assets, and all additional real estate holdings, have been left to Solice Elizabeth Brown. The silence in the room was absolute. Victoria's laptop screen dimmed into sleep mode. Daniel's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. Jennifer's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Marcus stood up so abruptly that his chair rolled backward. "That's impossible," he said flatly. "There has to be some mistake." Henderson continued reading as if Marcus hadn't spoken. In addition, Ms. Brown inherits all assets held by TB Investments LLC, TB Properties LLC, and Brown Family Trust, which includes a diversified portfolio currently valued at approximately $12 million, as well as commercial and residential properties in Seattle, Bellevue, and Tacoma. Victoria found her voice first. "Mr. Henderson, this doesn't make sense. Solice has never been involved in the business. She doesn't know anything about construction, about managing employees, about client relationships. This has to be some kind of error." "I assure you, Mrs. Patterson, there is no error. Your father was very explicit about these provisions." "But why?" Daniel asked, his voice strained. "We've dedicated our entire careers to Brown Construction. Marcus has been running operations for years. Victoria manages all the financial aspects. I oversee every major project. What has Solice ever contributed?" Henderson reached into his folder and withdrew a sealed envelope. "Your father anticipated these questions. He asked me to read this statement if there were any challenges to his decisions." He opened the envelope and began reading Theodore's words. "To my children, Marcus, Victoria, Daniel, and Jennifer, you have each been integral to Brown Construction's success, and you have been compensated accordingly throughout your careers with generous salaries, bonuses, company benefits, and the homes you live in. You have learned valuable skills, built professional reputations, and established yourselves as leaders in the construction industry. You have the tools and experience to succeed in whatever ventures you choose to pursue." The letter continued. "Solice, however, has been overlooked and underestimated, not because she lacks ability, but because I failed to recognize her potential. She possesses analytical skills, creative thinking, and emotional intelligence that will be essential for Brown Construction's future in an evolving marketplace. More importantly, she represents a fresh perspective, unconstrained by the assumptions and limitations that sometimes bind those of us who have been in the industry for decades." Marcus was pacing now. "This is insane. Dad must have been, I don't know, maybe the medication affected his judgment. People don't just hand over multi-million-dollar companies to someone with no experience." "Your father was completely lucid when he made these decisions. In fact, he came in several times over the past year to refine the details. He was more thoughtful and deliberate than I'd ever seen him." Jennifer turned to Solice, her voice gentle but confused. "Solice, did you know about this? Did Dad ever talk to you about taking over the company?" All eyes focused on Solice. This was the moment she'd been preparing for since reading Theodore's letter, the point where she had to decide who she was going to be. She could play the role they expected, surprised, overwhelmed, dependent on their guidance, or she could step into the identity her father had actually seen in her. She stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 4 generations of Brown family legacy settling on her shoulders. "I found a letter from Dad," she said quietly. "He explained his reasoning. He also explained why he kept me away from the business for so long and why he believes I'm the right person to lead it into the future." Marcus stopped pacing. "What letter?" Solice looked around the table at her siblings, these people she'd spent her life feeling inferior to, who now had discovered that their father's final assessment placed her at the center of everything they'd built their identities around.
The letter where he told me the truth about our mother's death, about Robert Henley, and about why he spent 24 years protecting me from a world he thought was too dangerous. Her voice grew stronger with each word. The letter where he explained that he'd been watching my career more closely than any of yours, and that he believed I had exactly the skills Brown Construction would need to survive and thrive in the next generation. She sat back down, no longer the forgotten child, but the chosen heir. The question now is whether you're willing to work with me or whether you're going to fight Dad's final decision. The decision point had arrived, not just for Solice, but for the entire Brown family.
The week following the will reading felt like navigating a minefield blindfolded. Solice had expected resistance from her siblings, but she hadn't anticipated the intensity of their coordinated response or the speed with which news of Theodore's shocking inheritance decisions spread through Seattle's tight-knit construction community. Marcus had called an emergency meeting for Friday morning at Brown Construction's headquarters, ostensibly to discuss transition plans, but really to present Solice with what he considered a reasonable alternative to their father's impractical final wishes. The company's main office occupied the top 2 floors of a building Theodore had constructed in the early 1990s, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering commanding views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond. Solice arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, wearing a charcoal business suit she'd purchased specifically for this meeting. The receptionist, Maria Santos, had worked for Brown Construction for 15 years and greeted Solice with a mixture of curiosity and respect that felt entirely new. "Good morning, Miss Brown. Mr. Marcus is waiting for you in the conference room. Can I get you coffee?" "Coffee would be great, thank you." Solice paused, realizing she'd never been asked that question in this building before. During her few previous visits, she'd been invisible to the staff, just Theodore's youngest daughter who occasionally stopped by. The conference room buzzed with tension. Marcus stood at the head of the table. Victoria had spreadsheets open on her laptop. Daniel was reviewing project timelines on his tablet, and Jennifer sat with a legal pad covered with notes. They looked like a corporate board preparing to handle a hostile takeover, which, Solice realized, was exactly how they viewed her inheritance. "Solice, thank you for coming," Marcus began, his tone carefully professional. "We've spent considerable time this week analyzing the company's current situation and developing a proposal that we think will work for everyone." Victoria turned her laptop screen toward Solice. "The reality is that Brown Construction is at a critical juncture. We have 18 active projects worth a combined $37 million, contracts pending for another $15 million in work, and a workforce of 247 employees whose livelihoods depend on seamless leadership transition." "Dad's decision puts all of that at risk," Daniel added. "Our clients expect continuity. They've worked with Marcus for years. They trust our systems and processes. If word gets out that the company is now being run by someone with no construction experience?" Jennifer leaned forward, her approach more gentle but equally pointed. "We're not questioning Dad's love for you, Solice, but love and business competency are 2 different things. You could lose everything he built and take all of us down with you." Marcus pulled out a FIC document. "So we've prepared a solution. You maintain majority ownership as Dad intended, but you sign operational control over to me as CEO. You receive all the financial benefits, the majority of profits, the real estate appreciation, everything, but the day-to-day management stays with the people who understand the industry." "It's really the best of both worlds," Victoria added. "You get financial security without the stress of learning a completely new field, and the company maintains the leadership continuity our clients expect." Solice had spent the past 3 days preparing for exactly this conversation. She'd driven to every Brown Construction job site, introducing herself to foremen and project managers. She'd read through 5 years of quarterly reports, analyzing profit margins and operational efficiency. Most importantly, she'd been making phone calls to clients, competitors, and industry contacts, learning things about the company that had apparently escaped her siblings' attention. "I appreciate the thought you've put into this, but I'm afraid your analysis is incomplete." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" Solice opened her own folder, revealing documents she'd spent sleepless nights assembling. For starters, you're right that we have $37 million in active contracts. What you haven't mentioned is that 6 of those projects are running over budget, 3 are behind schedule, and we're facing potential penalty clauses on 2 major developments that could cost us nearly $2 million. Victoria's expression sharpened. Where did you get that information? I spent Wednesday at the Bellevue Gateway project site talking to Rick Morrison, our site supervisor. Did you know that the client has been complaining for weeks about material delays that stem from our supplier relationships? Relationships that haven't been reviewed or updated in over 3 years? Daniel set down his tablet. One project doesn't represent... It's not one project, Solice interrupted, her voice gaining confidence. I called Janet Chen at Pacific Northwest Bank on Tuesday, the client for the downtown branch renovation. She mentioned that she'd been trying to reach someone at Brown Construction for 2 weeks about design modifications, but her calls kept getting transferred between departments without resolution.
She pulled out more notes. Then I spoke with Tom Rodriguez at Rodriguez Associates. They're the architects on the Tacoma waterfront project. He said they've been waiting for our structural engineer's approval on revised plans since January 15th, but our engineering department claims they never received the updated drawings. The room fell silent as Solice continued. I also had an interesting conversation with Linda Walsh at Walsh Development. The client who's been considering us for the new Microsoft campus housing project. She said they'd decided to go with Cascade Construction instead because their proposal was more innovative and showed better understanding of modern workforce housing needs. Marcus's jaw tightened. Solice, you had no authority to contact our clients directly. That kind of unauthorized communication could damage relationships we've spent years building. Actually, it did the opposite, Solice replied calmly. Linda Walsh was impressed that someone from the Brown family took the initiative to call her personally. She said it reminded her of the hands-on approach Dad used to take. She's agreed to reconsider our proposal if we can present fresh ideas for integrating sustainable building practices and flexible workspace design. Victoria closed her laptop with a sharp click. Even if there are some operational challenges, which every company faces, that doesn't change the fact that you don't have the technical knowledge to run a construction company. You're absolutely right, Solice acknowledged. I don't know the difference between I-beams and H-beams. I can't read architectural blueprints fluently. I've never managed a construction crew or negotiated with subcontractors. Her siblings exchanged glances, thinking they'd won the argument. But I do know how to analyze data and identify patterns. I know how to communicate with people and build relationships. And I know how to research and learn quickly. For instance, I spent Thursday evening reading industry publications and discovered that Brown Construction's profit margins have been declining for 3 years, while companies like Cascade Construction and Northwest Builders have been growing at 15% annually. She placed a printed article on the table. According to Construction Business Weekly, the companies that are thriving in today's market are the ones embracing technology integration, sustainable building practices, and innovative project management approaches. Meanwhile, we're still using the same methods Dad implemented in the 1980s. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Dad's methods built this company. Dad's methods were perfect for their time, Solice agreed. But the construction industry is evolving. Clients want smart building integration, energy-efficient designs, and project management systems that provide real-time updates. Our competitors are using drone surveys, 3D modeling software, and digital collaboration platforms, while we're still relying on paper-based systems and traditional approaches. Jennifer frowned. Even if that's true, learning to implement new technologies takes time we don't have. Solice smiled for the first time since entering the room, which is why I spent Thursday morning at the University of Washington talking to Professor Sarah Kim in their construction management program. She's agreed to consult with us on modernizing our operations, and she has graduate students who could help us implement new systems as part of their thesis projects. She pulled out business cards. I also made appointments with 3 technology companies that specialize in construction management software. And I've scheduled meetings with 2 green building consultants who could help us develop sustainable construction expertise. Marcus stood up abruptly. Solice, this is exactly what we were worried about. You're making commitments and changes without understanding how they'll impact our existing operations. You could destabilize everything. Or I could save us from becoming obsolete, Solice countered. Marcus, you've done an incredible job maintaining Dad's vision, but maintenance isn't growth. Victoria, your financial management has been excellent, but we're managing decline, not expansion. Daniel, your project execution is flawless for traditional builds, but we're losing bids to companies that offer more innovative solutions. She stood up as well, meeting Marcus's stare directly. I'm not asking you to trust my experience, because I don't have any. I'm asking you to trust Dad's judgment about what this company needs for the future. He saw something in me that none of you see yet, but he also left me 5% shares for each of you because he knew I'd need your expertise and support. The tension in the room was palpable. Victoria was the first to speak. What exactly are you proposing? Solice took a deep breath. I'm proposing that we spend the next 6 months working together to modernize Brown Construction. You keep your current roles and responsibilities, but we also implement new systems and approaches. If the company isn't performing better by August, higher profit margins, more satisfied clients, stronger competitive position, then I'll consider your original proposal about operational control. And if we refuse? Marcus asked. Solice's voice was steady but firm. Then I'll exercise my authority as majority owner to make the changes anyway, and you'll have to decide whether you want to be part of Brown Construction's future or part of its past. The gauntlet had been thrown. The first real struggle was just beginning.
3 months into Solice's leadership, everything that could go wrong seemed to be happening simultaneously. It was a sweltering Tuesday morning in late May when the call came that would test everything she'd learned about Brown Construction. Maria Santos's voice was tense when she knocked on Solice's office door. Miss Brown, you need to take this call immediately. It's James Patterson from the Seattle Children's Hospital Project. Solice had been dreading this moment. The Children's Hospital expansion was Brown Construction's largest active contract, a $12 million project that represented nearly a third of their annual revenue. More importantly, it was a high-profile community project that would define the company's reputation for years to come. Mr. Patterson, this is Solice Brown. Ms. Brown, I'm calling because we have a serious problem. Our structural engineer just informed us that the foundation work your crew completed last week doesn't meet the specifications in our contract. The concrete didn't cure properly, and we're seeing stress fractures that compromise the entire building's integrity. Solice felt her stomach drop. What exactly are we looking at in terms of remediation? Complete excavation and replacement of the foundation. We're talking about 3 weeks of additional work, minimum $50,000 in materials, plus the cost of demolition. But that's not the worst part. This delay pushes our completion date past the September deadline, which triggers penalty clauses worth $200,000. After hanging up, Solice immediately called an emergency meeting with her siblings and the project team. The conference room felt like a tribunal as Marcus, Victoria, Daniel, and Jennifer filed in with grim expressions, followed by Rick Morrison, the site supervisor, and Frank Chen, their structural engineer. Before anyone says anything, Marcus began, I want it on record that this is exactly what we warned would happen. You've been pushing new procedures and technologies faster than our crews can adapt, and now we're seeing the consequences. Daniel nodded grimly. The foundation crew was using that new concrete mix you insisted we try, the one with the reduced environmental impact. I told you we needed more testing before implementing it on a major project. Solice felt the weight of their accusations, especially because part of her feared they might be right.
Over the past 3 months, she'd pushed hard for Brown Construction to modernize, implementing new scheduling software, introducing sustainable building materials, and requiring additional training for all crew supervisors. The changes had been met with resistance at every level. "Frank, walk me through what happened," she said, turning to their structural engineer. Frank Chen had worked with Brown Construction for 8 years and was usually unflappable. Today, he looked exhausted. "The concrete mix itself isn't the problem. The specifications are sound. But the curing process was rushed because the crew was trying to meet the accelerated timeline you'd approved for the modified project schedule." Victoria pulled up the project timeline on her tablet. "The accelerated timeline was part of your efficiency initiative. You shaved 2 weeks off the original timeline to demonstrate improved project management." The crew felt pressure to pour concrete on Friday afternoon, even though the weather forecast showed humidity levels that were borderline for proper curing. Normally, we would have waited until Monday, but the schedule showed the foundation needed to be completed by end of week. Jennifer, always the most diplomatic, leaned forward. "Solice, we understand you're trying to prove that the company can operate more efficiently, but construction has built-in safety margins for good reasons. You can't just compress timelines without consequences." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just a construction problem. It was a leadership crisis. Solice had pushed for changes that had directly contributed to a $250,000 mistake on their most visible project. Worse, word of the foundation failure would spread through Seattle's construction community within hours, potentially damaging Brown Construction's reputation with other clients. "There's more," Victoria said quietly, opening her laptop. "I got a call from First National Bank this morning. They're concerned about the hospital project delays and want to review our credit line. If we can't demonstrate financial stability, they might call in our existing loans." Marcus crossed his arms. "We've had the same banking relationship for 15 years. They've never questioned our creditworthiness before." That was when Dad was alive and the company had a proven track record. Now they're seeing a new owner making changes that are resulting in costly mistakes. From their perspective, we're a higher risk. Daniel added another blow. "I also heard from Tom Rodriguez this morning, the architect on the Tacoma waterfront project. 3 other contractors have approached him about taking over our portion of the work. Word is getting out that Brown Construction is struggling with quality control."
Solice stared at the conference table, feeling the full weight of leadership's loneliest moments. Every decision she'd made with confidence now seemed reckless. Every change she'd implemented to modernize the company had created new vulnerabilities. Her siblings' skepticism, which had once motivated her to prove them wrong, now felt like justified concern. "The board at Seattle Children's Hospital is meeting tomorrow morning to discuss our contract," Frank Chen continued. "They could terminate our agreement and hire another contractor to complete the work. If that happens, we'd still be liable for the foundation remediation costs, but we lose the remaining $8 million in revenue. $8 million we've already factored into this year's financial projections," Victoria added. "Losing that contract would force us to lay off nearly 40 employees and could trigger default clauses in our other major contracts." The spiral was accelerating. Solice realized she was facing the possibility of destroying in 3 months what her father had spent 30 years building. The company that employed nearly 250 people, that had provided her siblings with their careers and identities, that represented 4 generations of Brown family legacy. All of it was in jeopardy because of her inexperienced leadership. "I need to ask something difficult," she said quietly. "Do you think Dad made a mistake?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Finally, Jennifer answered, "I think Dad saw potential in you that he wanted to develop, but potential and readiness aren't the same thing. Maybe he overestimated how quickly you could learn or underestimated how much the industry would resist change." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Solice, you've worked harder than any of us expected, and you've learned faster than we thought possible.
But learning to run a construction company isn't like learning to write stories. Mistakes in construction can hurt people, bankrupt families, destroy communities. The foundation issue isn't just about money. Children's Hospital serves the most vulnerable kids in the region. If our work fails, if there's a structural problem down the road, people could die. That's not a metaphor. That's the reality of what we do. Victoria's tone was gentler, but equally serious. We've prepared a presentation for tomorrow's hospital board meeting. Marcus will take full responsibility for the foundation issue and present a remediation plan. I've arranged bridge financing to cover the costs without affecting other projects. If we act quickly and professionally, we might salvage the contract. But, Marcus continued, we need to be realistic about your role going forward. The original proposal we made 3 months ago is still on the table. You maintain ownership and financial benefits, but operational control transfers to people with the experience to handle these situations. Solice looked around the room at the faces of people who'd spent their entire careers building something meaningful. They weren't her enemies. They were people who were genuinely terrified of watching everything they'd worked for collapse because they'd trusted someone who wasn't ready. The deepest challenge wasn't the foundation failure or the financial implications or even the potential loss of their biggest contract. The deepest challenge was confronting the possibility that everyone, including her father, had been wrong about her ability to lead Brown Construction. But as she sat in that conference room surrounded by doubt and facing potential catastrophe, Solice remembered something from Theodore's letter that she'd almost forgotten. He hadn't just written about her potential, he'd written about her ability to see patterns and connections that others missed. And suddenly, she realized there was a pattern here that no one else had noticed. Before we make any decisions about tomorrow's meeting, she said slowly, I need to ask Frank something. You said the concrete mix specifications were sound, but the curing process was compromised by humidity. Have we had unusual humidity levels this spring? Frank looked puzzled. Actually, yes, this has been one of the most humid springs on record. We've had to adjust curing times on several smaller projects. Solice turned to Rick Morrison. And Rick, you mentioned feeling pressure to pour on Friday despite the weather forecast. Who specifically told the crew that the foundation had to be completed by end of week? Rick shifted uncomfortably. Well, nobody directly said that, but the new project management software showed it as a critical deadline, and with all the emphasis on meeting accelerated timelines. But I never designated Friday as a hard deadline. The software was supposed to optimize scheduling around weather conditions and crew availability. She looked at Victoria. Can you pull up the actual software settings for the hospital project? As Victoria's fingers flew across her keyboard, Solice felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. The foundation failure wasn't the result of her pushing too hard for efficiency. It was the result of someone else's sabotage.
Victoria's fingers stopped typing abruptly, her face draining of color as she stared at her laptop screen. This can't be right, she whispered. What is it? Solice asked, moving around the table to look at the project management software interface. The weather integration module has been disabled for the past 6 weeks, Victoria said, her voice barely audible. The software should have automatically adjusted the concrete pouring schedule based on humidity forecasts, but someone manually overrode the system. Marcus frowned. That's impossible. Only administrators have access to those settings. That's what I thought too, Victoria replied, scrolling through the system logs. But look at this. The override was implemented on April 3rd at 11:47 p.m. using administrative credentials. Frank Chen leaned forward. April 3rd was right after you implemented the new environmental compliance protocols. I remember because we had to update all our material specifications that week. Solice felt a chill of recognition. Who has administrative access to the project management system? Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she pulled up the user permissions. Marcus, Daniel, myself,
And she paused, her expression shifting from confusion to something approaching horror. And Todd Williams! The name hit the room like a physical blow. Todd Williams had been Brown Construction's operations manager for 12 years, hired by Theodore himself as a trusted lieutenant who handled day-to-day logistics while the family focused on strategic decisions. He'd been notably absent from recent meetings, claiming he was overwhelmed by the transition to new systems. Todd wouldn't sabotage the company, Jennifer said immediately. He's been loyal to our family for over a decade. But Solice was already thinking back through the past 3 months, remembering conversations and incidents that had seemed like isolated frustrations at the time. Daniel, do you remember when the Bellevue Gateway project had those material delivery delays? Todd said it was because our new suppliers weren't reliable. And the communication breakdown with Pacific Northwest Bank, Marcus added slowly. Todd handles client correspondence for ongoing projects. If calls weren't being returned... Victoria was typing furiously, pulling up financial records and communication logs. The Walsh development proposal that was rejected, Todd was responsible for submitting the final documents. What if he deliberately made our bid less competitive? Rick Morrison looked sick. The crew schedules that had everyone working rushed timelines, those came from Todd's office. He said the new efficiency targets required aggressive scheduling. The pattern was becoming undeniable. For 3 months, while Solice had been struggling to implement changes and facing resistance at every turn, someone she'd trusted completely had been systematically undermining her efforts. Every failure, every crisis, every moment of doubt had been carefully orchestrated. But why? Jennifer asked. What could Todd possibly gain from destroying the company? Solice already knew the answer, pieces of information clicking together like a conspiracy theory that was turning out to simply be conspiracy. Victoria, can you access Todd's personnel file? I should be able to. Victoria's typing grew more urgent. Here it is. Standard employment history, references, emergency contacts. She stopped. Wait, his emergency contact is listed as Robert Henley, Jr. The conference room fell silent. Robert Henley, the business partner whose criminal activities had led to their mother's death, who had threatened their family for years before finally being killed in Miami. But apparently the Henley family's interest in Brown Construction hadn't died with Robert Henley. Robert Henley Jr. would be about Todd's age, if Robert Sr. had a son, and if that son blamed our father for his father's downfall. Marcus was already on his phone. I'm calling building security. We need to find Todd immediately. But Victoria was shaking her head as she scrolled through more records. He submitted his resignation yesterday, effective immediately, said he was moving to Portland for a new opportunity. Yesterday was the day before the hospital board meeting, Daniel realized. He timed his departure to leave us without operational management right when we need it most. Frank Chen stood up. We need to contact the hospital immediately. If Todd has been sabotaging projects for months, there could be other safety issues we're not aware of. And we need to audit every project he's touched. Material orders, schedule changes, quality control reports, everything could be compromised. Solice felt a mixture of vindication and overwhelming responsibility. She'd been right that her leadership wasn't the problem, but now she faced an even bigger challenge, proving to the Seattle Children's Hospital Board that Brown Construction could be trusted to complete their project safely. We're not just dealing with one failed foundation, she said aloud, her mind racing through implications. We're dealing with potential sabotage across multiple projects. The hospital board isn't going to care about our internal drama. They need to know their building is safe and will be completed properly.
Victoria was still digging through digital records. The good news is that Todd's access was limited to scheduling and communication. He couldn't alter actual construction specifications or engineering reports. The bad news is that we have no idea how many other clients have been receiving delayed responses or incomplete information. Marcus ended his call with security. Todd cleared out his office last night. Security cameras show him leaving with several boxes around 2 a.m. But here's the interesting part. He wasn't alone. There was another man with him, someone security didn't recognize. We need to treat this as corporate espionage, Solice said, her voice gaining strength as she shifted into crisis management mode. Victoria, I want a complete audit of all financial transactions Todd authorized. Daniel, we need engineering reviews of every project he managed. Marcus, start calling our major clients personally. Don't go through normal channels in case there are other compromised employees. Jennifer looked up from her own laptop. I'm pulling employee background checks for anyone Todd hired or recommended. If he's been placing people strategically, what about the hospital board meeting tomorrow? Frank Chen asked. Solice took a deep breath. This was the moment that would define not just her leadership of Brown Construction, but the company's entire future. She could play it safe, let Marcus handle the meeting as her siblings had planned, and hope to minimize damage. Or she could step fully into the role her father had envisioned for her. I'm presenting to the board myself, she said decisively, but not as an apology tour. We're going to show them exactly what happened, how we discovered it, and what we're doing to ensure it never happens again. Marcus started to object. Solice, this isn't the time to experiment with— This is exactly the time, she interrupted. Our company has been under attack for 3 months by someone who wanted to destroy Dad's legacy and eliminate the family's control. We've identified the threat, we're addressing the damage, and we're implementing security measures to prevent future sabotage. That's not a weakness. That's exactly the kind of leadership the hospital board needs to see. She turned to Frank Chen. I need you to prepare a comprehensive engineering assessment of the foundation, not just the problems, but the solutions. Show me exactly how we fix this and ensure it never happens again. Victoria, prepare a financial presentation showing how the company's actual performance compares to the sabotaged results. I want clear evidence that our struggles were artificially created. Daniel, coordinate with Rick to develop a new project timeline that accounts for proper quality control and safety measures. No more rushed schedules, no more cutting corners. And Marcus, she looked directly at her eldest brother, I need you to contact our insurance carrier about the corporate espionage. This isn't just our problem, it's a criminal matter that needs to be handled properly. Jennifer looked up from her own laptop, her expression grim. Solice, you should see this. I found Todd's real employment history. He didn't just work for construction companies. He worked for 3 of our biggest competitors over the past 15 years. And all 3 of those companies gained major contracts after their competitors experienced quality control issues or project management failures. The scope of the deception was staggering. Todd Williams hadn't just been Robert Henley Jr. seeking revenge. He'd been part of a sophisticated operation to eliminate competition through systematic sabotage. That's actually perfect, Solice said, surprising everyone with her calm confidence. Tomorrow, I'm not just presenting to the hospital board about one failed foundation. I'm presenting evidence of an industry-wide conspiracy that Brown Construction has successfully identified and stopped. Victoria stared at her sister with something approaching admiration. You're going to turn this crisis into a competitive advantage. I'm going to turn this crisis into proof that Brown Construction is exactly the kind of company Seattle Children's Hospital wants to partner with. A company that doesn't just build buildings, but protects its clients from threats they might never see coming. Marcus slowly nodded. That's actually brilliant. Instead of looking like a company with quality control problems, we look like a company that solved a problem other contractors don't even know they have. But it only works if we can prove everything, Daniel warned. If there's any doubt about our evidence, or if the remediation plan isn't perfect, then we'd better make sure there's no doubt, Solice said firmly. We have 18 hours to build the most comprehensive, professional, and compelling presentation of our careers, not just to save one contract, but to establish Brown Construction as the most trustworthy construction company in the Northwest Pacific. The breakthrough wasn't just discovering the sabotage. It was realizing that the crisis could become the foundation for something stronger than what Theodore Brown had originally built. The Seattle Children's Hospital boardroom buzzed with tension as Solice entered at exactly 9 a.m., carrying herself with a confidence that would have been unimaginable just months earlier. The 12-member board sat around an imposing mahogany table, their expressions ranging from skeptical to concerned. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the hospital's chief administrator, had made it clear in her opening remarks that Brown Construction's contract was hanging by a thread. "Miss Brown," Dr. Morrison began, "we appreciate you taking the time to address our concerns personally. However, I must be direct. The foundation failure on our expansion project has raised serious questions about your company's reliability. Several board members are advocating for contract termination and hiring a replacement contractor." Solice had spent the entire night preparing for this moment, but not in the way her siblings had expected. Instead of defensive explanations or apologetic promises, she'd prepared something unprecedented, a complete transformation of how Seattle's construction industry understood security and quality control. "Dr. Morrison, board members, thank you for this opportunity. I'm here not to make excuses for the foundation issue, but to share something that affects far more than just our project. Information that could protect Seattle Children's Hospital and every major construction client in the region." She activated the large screen at the front of the room, displaying a presentation that represented 18 hours of intensive investigation and preparation. 3 days ago, we discovered that Brown Construction has been the target of a sophisticated corporate espionage operation designed to damage our reputation and steal our clients. What we've learned since then suggests this isn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern affecting multiple construction companies throughout the Pacific Northwest. The first slide showed Todd Williams' photograph alongside documented evidence of his sabotage activities. For 3 months, our operations manager, a man we trusted completely, systematically undermined our projects. He disabled safety protocols, altered schedules to create rushed conditions, and intercepted client communications to create the impression of poor service. Dr. James Patterson leaned forward. "Are you suggesting that the foundation failure was deliberate sabotage?" "I'm not suggesting it, I'm proving it." She clicked to the next slide, showing screenshots of the disabled weather monitoring system. "Our project management software includes automated safety protocols that would have prevented concrete pouring under unsuitable humidity conditions. Those protocols were manually disabled by someone with administrative access, creating the exact conditions that led to the foundation failure." Dr. Morrison's expression had shifted from skepticism to alarm. "What you're describing sounds like corporate terrorism." "That's exactly what it is. And here's why it matters to you specifically." The presentation moved to a detailed timeline showing how the sabotage had been timed to create maximum damage just before the hospital board meeting. Todd Williams resigned 24 hours before this meeting, after ensuring that the foundation failure would be discovered at the worst possible moment. This wasn't random, it was a calculated attempt to force you to terminate our contract and hire a replacement contractor. She clicked to the next slide, revealing Todd's real identity and connections. Robert Henley Jr. is actually Todd Williams, son of a man who tried to use Brown Construction for money laundering operations 25 years ago. When my father exposed those activities, the elder Henley was forced out of the construction industry. His son has been seeking revenge ever since. The room was silent as Solice presented evidence of similar sabotage operations targeting other construction companies. "We've identified a pattern spanning 15 years. Companies like Cascade Construction, Northwest Builders Group, and Pacific Construction Group have all experienced sudden quality control failures that led to major contract losses. In each case, those contracts were then awarded to Henley-controlled entities." Board member Susan Chen spoke up. "You're suggesting there's been a conspiracy to manipulate the construction bidding process?" "I'm proving it," Solice said, displaying financial records that Victoria had uncovered.
The same investment groups that control the companies benefiting from these failures also have financial ties to Robert Henley Jr. This isn't just sabotage, it's organized crime disguised as business competition. Dr. Morrison set down her pen. Miss Brown, if what you're saying is true, this has implications far beyond our construction project. Which is why I've spent the past 18 hours coordinating with the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division and the Washington State Attorney General's office. By the end of today, there will be federal investigations into construction industry corruption that could result in criminal charges and the recovery of millions in stolen contracts. The presentation moved to its most crucial section, Brown Construction's response and future safeguards. But here's what matters most for your project. We haven't just identified the problem, we've solved it and implemented protections that make us the safest construction choice in the region. Frank Chen joined Solice at the front of the room, presenting detailed engineering assessments. The foundation remediation isn't just about fixing a problem, it's about implementing enhanced safety protocols that exceed industry standards. We're installing real-time monitoring systems that will provide continuous updates on structural integrity throughout the construction process. Daniel stepped forward with project timelines. We've redesigned our entire quality control process. Every major construction milestone now requires multi-level verification, and all safety protocols are integrated into blockchain-based systems that cannot be tampered with. Victoria presented financial guarantees. Brown Construction is providing bonded completion insurance at twice the industry standard, and we're establishing an escrow account that ensures project completion even in worst-case scenarios. Marcus addressed operational continuity. We've implemented new security clearances for all personnel, and we're partnering with cybersecurity firms to protect against future espionage attempts. But it was Solice who delivered the presentation's most powerful conclusion.
Dr. Morrison, board members, 3 months ago, I inherited Brown Construction as someone with no industry experience. Today, I stand before you as the CEO of the only construction company in the region that has successfully identified and eliminated a criminal conspiracy that was threatening the entire industry. She clicked to the final slide, showing revised project timelines and enhanced service guarantees. We're not asking you to forgive our mistakes. We're offering you the opportunity to partner with a company that has proven we'll go to extraordinary lengths to protect our clients' interests. The foundation failure led us to discover threats that could have affected dozens of future projects. By choosing to continue with Brown Construction, you're not just getting a building, you're getting protection from risks that other contractors don't even know exist. The board exchanged glances before Dr. Morrison spoke. Ms. Brown, this is unprecedented. We came into this meeting prepared to terminate your contract. Now you're suggesting we should view recent events as evidence of enhanced reliability? I'm suggesting that Seattle Children's Hospital deserves a construction partner who has proven they'll expose criminal activity rather than cover up problems. A partner who will protect your interests, even when it's difficult, even when it reveals uncomfortable truths, even when it requires us to completely reimagine how construction projects should be managed. James Patterson consulted his notes. The remediation timeline you've presented is actually shorter than we expected, and the enhanced monitoring systems address concerns we didn't even know we had. Susan Chen nodded. The financial guarantees and completion bonding are significantly more comprehensive than our original contract required. Dr. Morrison looked around the table, reading the mood of her board members. Ms. Brown, I think I speak for everyone when I say this has been the most unusual contractor presentation any of us has ever experienced. You've turned what appeared to be a competency crisis into evidence of exceptional problem solving and client protection. More than that, added another board member, you've potentially saved our organization and others from future manipulation. The enhanced security protocols you're implementing could become the new industry standard. Dr. Morrison stood up. The board will need to vote formally, but I believe we're prepared to not only continue your contract, but to recommend Brown Construction for future hospital projects throughout the region.
6 months later, Solice stood in her father's former office, now completely redesigned to reflect a new era of Brown construction leadership. The wall that had once displayed traditional construction awards now showcased recognition for innovative safety protocols, environmental sustainability, and corporate security leadership. The FBI investigation she'd initiated led to 12 indictments and the recovery of over $40 million in fraudulent contracts. Marcus entered carrying quarterly reports that showed Brown Construction's most profitable period in company history. The King County government contract just approved our bid for the new Civic Center project. They specifically cited our security protocols and transparency initiatives as deciding factors. Victoria followed with her laptop open to financial projections. We've been asked to consult with construction companies in Portland, Vancouver, and San Francisco about implementing similar anti-sabotage measures. The consulting revenue alone could add $2 million annually. Daniel and Jennifer joined them with updates on the expanding workforce. We've hired 37 new employees in the past 4 months, including cybersecurity specialists and project transparency coordinators. The Seattle Children's Hospital project finished 2 weeks ahead of schedule and 15% under budget. But the most meaningful change was in the family dynamics. Marcus no longer questioned Solice's decisions. He collaborated on implementing them. Victoria had become her closest advisor on strategic planning. Daniel and Jennifer brought innovative ideas that combined their experience with her fresh perspectives. "Dad would be proud," Jennifer said, looking around the transformed office. "Dad would be amazed," Marcus corrected with a smile. He saw potential in Solice, but I don't think even he imagined she'd revolutionize an entire industry. Solice looked out the window at Seattle's skyline, dotted with Brown construction projects that now represented something entirely new. Buildings constructed with transparency, security, and innovation that protected clients from threats they'd never even considered. The forgotten child had become the industry leader who transformed family legacy into something far greater than what had come before. Theodore Brown had built a successful construction company. Solice Brown had built the future of ethical construction in the Pacific Northwest. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.